Hey guys, so I am back and I'm going to be inviting a friend on who I had to twist her arm because she didn't really want to come on. I'm trying to get more people to participate in some of these things that, conversations that I have offline and bring them online, get people more involved. There are tons of people that reached out after I put out that last video that I was really grateful for. And the spring energy is in full swing. So yeah, everybody is like just feeling energized and ready to participate in something, and collaborations are in the air. And so my really good friend, I twisted her arm and I'm getting her on to discuss the model that we both created together, partly based on John Uller's work and another woman that she was in contact with. And John Uller's work, I met through the Imagination podcast, really heavy content. So just like a, trigger warning for people who haven't exposed themselves to some of the real darkest stuff in the world yet. It might put you off for a few days, but basically, this model that we're bringing forth is meant to assist, everyday regular people. We're constantly going through trauma, people who have had traumatic events in their childhood, but haven't disassociated, haven't had like severe trauma. So I'm not a licensed practitioner, and I won't work with anyone who I feel needs to see someone who has been studying this their whole life. Like John, for example, he has been working in prisons, working in all sorts of institutions, and helping victims and helping, diagnose perpetrators and stuff like that. So he has a lot of experience in dealing with this, um, and obviously, I can't help everybody that comes to see me. And I don't think that, people should be contacting just anyone on the internet, whether they be, even if they have other skills, um, different types of healers. Like they come in different modalities, but there's certain traumatic events that happen that really, you really need to be careful with when you're interacting with these people, because there's all these kind of moving parts, and you want to ensure the safety of the person that you're working with. So I highly recommend that if you are providing services out there, that you really do get to learn about more severe forms of trauma in order to put things in context, right? And to put people's experiences when they approach you in context to these larger scopes of things going on within the psyche. And so talking about MK Ultra previously and all these different things, like they fall into these larger scopes, but these things are happening in very mild levels throughout society. And so we can obviously empower ourselves, we can coach other people, and we can use the skills that we have gained to a certain extent, um, depending on where that person's at. So my friend just jumped on. I'm going to let her on, and we're going to start going from there. We're going to look at the model. I'm going to try to make it not too long of a video, but really just a general overview. There we go. Miss Kelly Chase. Thank you for coming on, Kelly. I can't hear you, so hold on a second. I'm just going to put my, yeah, this should be right for me. So somehow your sound is off right now. It says mute.
Oh, hi there.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. So anyway, I was just explaining, that we came up with this model together, and that I twisted your arm. I wanted to bring you on because we really kind of built it together, in that course, that span of whatever time we spent doing it. And I really
Mhm.
want to share it with everybody because I feel that people are going to gain a lot from using this model, just as we have, in our own lives. And obviously it's all about self-motivation and taking that next step in whichever direction people want to go, you know, sharing the knowledge, right? And that's what it's all about. So I'm going to share my screen, and I built, you might recognize this is kind of like a more sophisticated version of it, but I just sort of built this model. Can you see it? And I can add in some more bubbles here, so
Yeah.
no worries about that. But this is just like, a nicer, refined version of what it is that we're doing with the self at the top, capital S
Mhm.
self, the integrated self, the one at the helm, the one in the driver's seat that then gets to negotiate with these parts. So you had recommended, I was basing my model on John Oler, which I had mentioned at the beginning of the video, which kind of goes about this in a different way. And, referring to the I am at the top, but then all these different parts that are related to, like, could be alters, that have come online through trauma or through different, just programming in societal programming, all sorts of different programming. And then it can get more intense depending on what that person has experienced.
Mhm.
And then all those bubbles are floating around, and then they kind of come out. They can come out and then take over the helm, right? They can start driving, get in the driver's seat, and then start driving without us being aware that they've taken over, right? In extreme cases. So
Yeah, I guess
every
it's good to give people a little like background context on that too. Like we were talking about how, something triggered me and I didn't realize that at the time when that person said that thing to me that it had triggered me. But for the rest of the week, I created all these masochistic behaviors because that one person had said something to me. And I didn't realize that my inner rebel had taken over and had like completely um started to govern my whole life based on these poor decisions. And I was drinking more, I was smoking more weed, I was eating terribly. And it went on for a couple of weeks before I realized that I was out of control. And I was like, I didn't even realize that I was out of control while I was out of control. And that kind of freaked me out a little bit. Like that it took me that long to realize that I wasn't even driving my own boat inside my head.
Exactly. And that's why this whole video that I saw with John that I shared with you is like when the concept of these alters that are created out of protection, right? These different parts of self, these different bubbles and parts of self are created to protect ourselves. And so they can, depending on how much we have to protect ourselves, let's say in childhood or during different traumatic events, they can get really big and they could just take over, like you said, for like weeks or months at a time. And they're not always easy to discern, right? Like for me, I have a lot that just come in as a state, like it's like a state of being. And I won't recognize, like part of this work is learning to recognize when one of those parts of self is coming up to defend you or is coming up to, sabotage you, basically. And so, all of these parts of self are good parts. They're all there. They all have a purpose, but we need to negotiate with them. Like we need to have the I am that I am negotiating with these parts and see them when they're coming, when they're trying to take over the helm, basically.
That's right, because the critic and the inner rebel, like the two, so that's how I describe it. I got the three categories, right? We got the inner critic, the inner coach, and the inner rebel. And when I tried to take on my inner rebel actually took over. She was like, "You think you're going to get me to do all this stuff and give up my control over the vessel? I don't think so." And my inner rebel just went off and was like, "I'm in control here. We're going to do nothing but things that are fun and rebellious." And I had to realize that that voice was not helping me and kind of regain control of myself from that voice.
Hmm.
And that's
Yeah.
when I was like, oh my God, I realize now that I have these different voices in my head and they're all playing different roles. And I need to kind of like start discerning what vocabulary each one is speaking in so that I know who's speaking.
Yes,
And then
exactly.
based on that, I can start like renegotiating with those internal voices.
Exactly.
Because
Like developing a relationship with them, right? So it's not like it's an
because
awareness of
my
who they are, what their needs are, and so
yeah,
on.
because the inner critic is not bad. Honestly, the inner critic is like it is what makes us want to do good at our jobs. It is what
Mhm.
propels us forward in life and gives us our goal setting ability and all of this good stuff, right? It's not necessarily bad, but when it's in charge, it's not good. And it's the same for the rebel. Being rebellious and fun and exciting is not a bad thing, but it's when it runs the show that it's bad. So it's like finding the balance for those two and letting the one in the middle be like, okay, you can have some fun now. Okay, a little bit of criticism here. Good. Okay.
Mhm.
And it's like you said, it's not blocking everything out. Because as soon as you start to like, okay, I'm not gonna let my inner child speak anymore or my inner rebel speak anymore because she's just too out of control, then she's like going to rebel against that because nobody wants to be put in a corner and told to be quiet and told they're
Exactly.
not
Everybody
allowed
has
to come
needs.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all the parts of self have needs and they need to be validated. And if those needs aren't really necessary, like let's say if it's more like a self-protection, like the need is just to protect, right? Then maybe that need is showing up in a completely different way when a negotiation can happen, and then that part of self just kind of like can um, no longer have such strong needs, right? And not have that desire to take over the helm because it's feeling fulfilled, it's feeling heard, and actions are being taken to
Mm-hmm.
to satiate that part of self, right? That's calling out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like
Um,
the inner rebel is where all that creative energy comes from, right? And we don't want to squash that completely, but mine just runs the show sometimes, and I don't want her to be in charge because like she doesn't want to do things that are boring, and sometimes life has to be boring. It's like part of the everyday life. Like life can't be exciting at every moment. How would you know what excitement is if you're just always excited, right? Just it's not meant to be that way.
yeah,
And
exactly.
the
It
inner
has to be
rebel
in
wants it to
balance.
be that way, but
Or
it's just
healthy
nice.
fun, right? It has to be
Yeah.
healthy fun, right? Because it could still be like that inner rebel can still come out and have fun and fulfill its needs in terms of like excitement and joy and pleasure, but in the right ways, not taking
Mhm.
it to an extreme, and then the other parts all suffer for
Yeah,
it.
well, that's it. And also, like my inner rebel, she her idea of fun, it was based off the old version of me's idea of fun. And so she still thinks that like drinking is fun, but really, the new version of Kelly doesn't really have that much fun drinking, right? And so
Hmm.
I end up drinking, thinking it's going to be all this fun, and then it's not,
Hmm.
And so my inner rebel needs a realignment with what real fun is, because the way I used to have fun was also very masochistic.
Yeah.
So it's like, and that's from you know, traumatized childhood and all of that stuff, we become good at satiating ourselves and self-soothing using drugs and alcohol and sex and all these other
Yeah, it's like
things.
that. It's like escapism, right? It's like a form of
Yeah,
escapism.
yeah, and that's what the inner rebel's good at. And so
I'm gonna actually write that here. I'm gonna write escapism because we didn't have that on the last one. So I put escapism here.
yeah,
Because I think that's a really important one because the inner rebel is like, it's protection. Like I could
yeah,
put protection as well. Um, but it's really, the function of protection can sometimes be escapism, right? Or the
hmm
reason. So
and I think protection also falls under the critic, because the critic will be like, you know, don't trust that. right? And that's more the protection than it is the inner rebel, because the inner rebel is like throws caution to the wind. It's
Mm-hmm.
not worried about protection. It's stomping all over everybody's feelings.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't
So
care.
I guess the inner rebel could also be like the persecutor, right? The inner rebel could be like the shit disturber, right? Like the
Yeah,
not so much revolutionary, like in a healthy way, but what would be the negative form of that? Like the
just straight up rebellion. Right. It's in
um
the title of the name.
mhm. Like the
Non-conformity, you know,
what's that?
non-conformity.
I'll put shadow because I find it's like kind of overarching.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
like
I
I could
think the
put,
inner rebel does, she uses the shadow as her mischievous part, right? It's,
yeah, exactly. Like the shadow, she'll be like, yeah, like the shadow will be there, and she'll harness it without your knowing. Like if the shadow isn't healed, then the inner rebel can easily come in and just harness the power of the shadow.
hmm, exactly.
Um, oh, the aggressor, that's the word I was looking for. The aggressor. So, the part that would lash out at someone to protect themselves,
Mhm.
like rather than talk things through or whatever. Like we also had like the pleasure, right? It was like, pleasure, the pleasure seeker.
Fun and spontaneous, and the risk taker.
Oh yeah, the risk taker is huge
The
over
risk
there.
take, yeah.
Um, Let me put risk
Sex
taker.
needs, selfish, pleasure, action, anger, and rage.
So I kind of felt like, action obviously needs to be in the realm of the inner coach, because if the inner rebel and inner critic is informing, like in a healthy way, let's say there's a healthy dialogue, it should be informing the inner coach on when to take action. Like if anyone's going to take action, obviously it has to be the self with capital S, but it should be coming, I think, from the inner coach, having negotiated with, the needs of the inner rebel that wants to take action, but then the inner coach might like harness that and be like, okay, do you really want to take action on that? And then do that negotiation. What do you think?
I think that the inner rebel is always on the move. Like that is actually part of the nature of rebellion, in my opinion. It's like and that's why all these other the risk takers in there, right? It's like that requires action, not necessarily thoughtful action, but action nonetheless.
So impulsivity, impulsive action,
Yeah, exactly. It's more impulsive action than focused action.
impulsive action.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I decided I'm gonna drink. Okay, I've decided I'm gonna spend all this money shopping. Or, it's like, you know, when the inner rebel comes in, it's like it's doing things that it's rebelling against, right? It's always something that's like, I shouldn't do this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's not that like, but you're still always taking an action that you shouldn't be taking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this would be, so if impulsive action is under the inner rebel, inaction would be under the inner critic, like,
Yes.
stagnation, inaction. Let's just call
Yeah,
it stagnation.
you're judging yourself so much you don't have the guts to go do anything because the critic's just going to criticize anything that you do. So you're better off not to do anything.
Exactly. And that's really fairly common with people is like not wanting to negotiate with the inner rebel who might have some really good ideas, right? Because it's connected to that revolutionary energy. But then the inner critic saying like, whoa, whoa, and wanting to stay in its comfort zone and then just being more
Mhm.
happy, yeah, staying stagnant. And then the inner coach would be, I think, uh, informed action, right? Because it,
I think it would be even more goal-oriented action.
yeah, that's what I mean by informed. Like,
Mhm.
you know, it's got reason. Like there's, it's thought things through. It has a
Purpose.
plan.
Action with purpose.
What's that?
Purpose.
Yeah, exactly. So let me just put this, I think I'm gonna have to make this one
But
bigger
informed
here.
action is good too.
Oh,
So in action, I think we're going to categorize that more as like procrastination.
yeah, inaction. Yeah, I'll put procrastination here
Mhm.
because that's a huge one that goes hand in hand with stagnation. And that's also a form of protection, right? So that because the inner critic is going to be saying things like, you can't do it, you're not going to be able to accomplish this goal that you're trying to work on.
Yeah.
And then this kind of, you could see them all as altars, the altar of procrastination would just like come up and then sit right there on the helm and
Yeah.
be like, enforcing this procrastination,
Hmm.
this stagnation energy. Well, the inner coach isn't speaking up because it hasn't been identified yet in the person and they can't actually hear the voice of the inner coach.
Hmm.
And then the inner rebel might come in every now and then like throw in some shadow, right? Or get aggressive and or take risks with pleasure or whatever, in order to reinvigorate things, right? And get things out of procrastination.
Hmm. Hmm. But that's
It's
where
like this,
that, impulsive action from the inner rebel is like, that's what you need at that point, because it's the only thing that's going to get you out there. Because that inner coach, unless it's really strong, it's not going to overpower the critic and the rebel.
exactly. And that's when you have the extremes, right? The
Yeah.
the big ups and downs within people's lives because they go from like the inner critic straight to the inner rebel and back and
Hmm.
forth. And they don't have that middle ground, that middle pillar.
Hmm.
Um, which let's fill some things in here just to give people like a better idea of what's the inner coach. So the inner coach is, it's all about,
Motivation.
yeah, it's
It's
goals,
yeah.
motivation. I'll write motivation in there.
Hmm.
So it's goal oriented.
Hmm.
It's the voice that motivates you within self and
Yeah.
like, will give you like the good criticism, right? It'll give you the positive stuff, the constructive criticism.
That's right. Constructive criticisms. And it encourages self-development.
Yeah, so what would that voice sound like? The voice, the part of self that encourages self-development. Is it a strong, harsh? Because we talked about this before, where like,
No, it's like
if
this.
we're encouraged,
When I start working out and I feel out of shape, my inner coach always says, it's okay. Well, after you do this video 3 times, you're going to be able to do this. Keep trying. That's the inner coach. It's like,
for the workout
it,
videos, yeah.
yeah, when I'm working out and I'm trying to do these like moves and I haven't, I got the strength to do them yet. I don't just give up. My inner coach just says, keep going. You're going to get stronger. Every time you do this, it's going to get easier. And you're going to be proud of yourself when you're able to do these moves without any strain. And it's the truth.
So it's encouragement,
Mm-hmm.
it's that encouraging voice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if you can't hear that voice, if you haven't developed that encouraging voice, that part of self that's going to encourage the self, well, then who else is going to do it, right? Like that's the whole thing about working with this model is like you have to develop these parts in order to, you can't expect someone else on the outside to give it to you, to be always encouraging you or motivating you.
Hmm.
Um, that's why we develop these parts within self and like really they are all part of us, but sometimes they've been squashed due to life, different things that happen in life, depending on your childhood, whatever. And if you didn't have a role model showing you what those parts of self are, right, to mirror that to you,
Hmm.
then you might have to sort of like kind of start from scratch and build those up for yourself and make sure that those voices get really loud
Yeah,
so
I
that
mean, you're the one keeping yourself company in your head. And if you let these other voices run the show, you're always going to be polarized in the inner critic or the inner rebel. You'll never be balanced in the middle, and that's what we're really trying to do is like make this inner column the priority and the voice of reason that's most of the time in charge, and then get feedback from the inner critic and the inner rebel because they're both very valuable still, but they can't be running the show because when either one of them's in charge, they don't have the general best interest. They're only thinking about, like, the inner rebel will only think about enjoying themselves, and the inner critic will criticize to a point where you're procrastinating, nothing gets done, right? It's like you need to keep those two in check so that the one in the middle can flourish.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Exactly. So I'm just looking over some of the other things. So there's positive traits, like you said, to the inner critic and the inner
Mhm.
rebel, as long as they're in negotiation and in balance with that inner coach voice.
Yeah.
So the judgment that would be here under inner critic can be healthy, but it can
Yes.
also be self-sabotaging
Yes. And
for the
I
inner.
absolutely love my inner rebel. She's fun. I don't ever want her to go away forever. But I also I don't like the way my life is when she's in charge.
Mhm.
So it's like, you know, in order for me to appreciate her more, I can't let her just be in charge anymore because she's not good at running all the tasks of my life. She's only good at certain things, right? And it's the same with the inner critic. If I let the inner critic run the show, I'm judgmental on myself. I'm really hard to get along with because I put up all these, um, beliefs together that I hold people to these standards now that I'm like criticizing myself over, and life becomes hard. And that's not
Yeah,
good
because
either.
the more we criticize, the more we're self-critical, right, in an unhealthy way, like not the healthy being self-critical in a constructive way, but in an unhealthy way, then the
Yeah,
more prone we are to judge everybody else around us
exactly. That's our inner
in an
dialogue.
unhealthy way.
Yeah.
So that would lead to like the inner
The
critic.
cognitive dissonance, what you focus on becomes your reality.
Well, you got to see reality for what it is and not be caught in illusion, but on a basic, just kind of general level.
Right, but if
So if you're
the inner
judging,
critic is always the one talking, then that's like the brain starts picking out, things that are in alignment with that inner critic.
yeah, it self justifies, right? What's the word I'm looking for? It begins to self justify those beliefs by finding anything it can in the environment or what's being said around it
That's right.
to, yeah, to reaffirm that. So if the more the inner critic is going off, I find the more the person gossips and the less they're in that state which would be the inner coach, which is more about like, solution oriented, like having conversations with people. They say there's those three levels, those three layers. There's people that talk about other people. There's people that talk about, what is it? people that talk about other people, people that talk about things happening in the world, and then people that talk about solutions, something like that. Don't paraphrase me, but there's like a really good quote on that. And those are kind of like, I think the different states we can get into with these parts, right? And I know that we really enjoy talking about solutions, and I love that about you. But now I can kind of identify that if we're in a gossipy kind of state, we're more than likely this inner critic has gotten a little out of control and is driving the helm.
That's right. That's right. And that's what we're trying to do here is to recognize what dialogue each one of these uses so that we can see who's running the show at any one moment in our day. Because they slip in so seamlessly, and my inner critic can just start talking, and I don't realize that the coach is nowhere to be seen anymore. And now my inner critic is talking, and she's messing with all the good work that the inner coach did earlier. And
Mm-hmm.
now for my inner coach to get back into control, my inner rebel kicks in and is like, no, 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 no. I'll take it from here. And so the inner critic for me always creates a scenario where something happens, and then the inner rebel will take over, and then I can't get control back from my inner rebel. And now that I'm learning the vocabulary that my inner rebel uses and my inner critic, I'm starting to be like, okay, I can see that this is going to lead me in this direction now. These thoughts that I'm having, I want to take risks. I'm having impulsive thoughts. I'm like pleasure oriented. I don't care about work or what this does for my diet or, my goals in life, you know? And so I know now that when I start hearing that voice, I'm like, well, okay, that's my inner rebel and she's in charge, and I don't really want her to be. So I'll give myself permission to allow my inner coach to step in and be like, have a heart to heart with my inner rebel, which is something I started to do in like have like literal conversations with my inner rebel from the coach's perspective and be like, okay, I know you want to have fun right now, but that kind of fun, is it really fun? Like, let's be honest. Are we, Kelly, as a group, having fun lately doing this? Or is this just what you're used to doing and the only way you know how to rebel? So that's what we're doing. And, that's
Because I don't
usually
want
the
to be doing what I know, because I don't want to be doing what I know is really healthy for me, because I have walls up of protection around
yeah,
doing those things, because those
yeah,
parts are still vulnerable. So
exactly.
instead, I'm gonna, let that build up to a point where the inner rebel has to come out and then, get impulsive with everything and
Yeah,
just like push things to the limit.
yeah.
When in reality, if things are happening incrementally and that's being fulfilled on a very, real level, because that's the whole thing we were talking about, like authenticity. And when we're in healthy relationships with people, that space is so healing and it's so healthy that you can actually put down your guard and you can start having fun, like real fun, you
Mm-hmm.
know, through planning different things and, positive exchange and just like jovial moments where you're like, kind of just being, yourself and just enjoying life,
Yeah.
right? But you got to have the right people around you. So if you're someone who doesn't give that to yourself, then, you're never going to get to that space, right? So it's a lot about choosing, like picking your fruit wisely, like choosing, the people in your inner circle really wisely. And, a lot of people still have Stockholm syndrome in the sense where, they choose people to surround them that aren't necessarily going to be bringing out the best parts of self, right? If it's a highly competitive, you know, there's different forms of healthy competition, but if it is, if you're in an environment where there's like, it's abusive, if there's any form like dealing with, like we were talking about earlier, sociopaths or, these more evolved forms of self, obviously that take over these people, right? Because their needs were never fulfilled. And so now they have these parts of self that could have completely taken over that are disconnected from, true authentic relationship. then it's going to be really hard. You're going to have to stay in these, with the protection, and there's going to be escapism. And of course, the inner rebel is going to be wanting to drive the helm if you're in environments that are unhealthy, right? Or you'll
Mhm.
just fall into the inner critic where, some people might just like be more reclusive and then go into isolation. I'm going to write isolation here because that's also
I was just thinking of
isolation.
what a unmatched the inner coach is for that kind of environment. So it's obvious why that inner coach can't be out there when you're depressed and surrounded by people who are putting you down and abusive relationships. It's hard to have that inner coach that's like, yeah, you got this. You're great. And it's like
Yeah,
that boy is just
totally.
nowhere to be seen. Like, you
Yeah,
know,
100%, 100%. So if you're building up the inner coach, you're just coming into this information, you're building up the inner coach, and you're coming out of like a really unhealthy relationship, for example,
yeah.
then, it's important to kind of, you know, put up have like the healthy boundaries, basically, to create and really solidify this like center pillar, this middle pillar, and like really, give yourself the healthy energetic space. Like I don't want to use the word safe space, right? Because it's like you don't want to become fragile to the world. But if anyone's endured anything like really traumatic, yeah, it is going to be like that. You have to create those healthy boundaries for a safe space in order to rebuild up the self. Because the reparenting happens in here as well.
Hmm.
Um, Let me just write healthy boundaries because I feel like that's important.
It is absolutely. And I think, when you're first trying to get your coach to talk, it's gonna feel real cheesy,
Uh-huh.
And I think it's good for people to go out and like listen to motivational videos. There's all kinds of like little speeches that people give to motivate. And like, if you don't know what an inner coach should sound like, just go and listen to some of these motivational videos that tell you that you can do it, and then just kind of like, start talking to yourself in that tone and build these new neural pathways, right? And create this new way to respond to all these situations that isn't from a state of criticism or escapism, right? It's like, I can, whatever the world has to throw at me now, I feel really confident that I can handle it from a place of like, you know, I'm not going to lose my mind because this happened. I'm going to like have to think about this logically and take steps to resolve whatever issues that come at me. But it's only because I've been working on getting my inner coach in line. Whereas my inner rebel would escape from the bad situation and not want to deal with it. And then the inner critic would like procrastinate on top of that. And to the two of them together would keep me from actually facing that stuff. And now
Mhm.
that I'm developing that inner coach, I can hear myself. And yeah, sometimes I sound really cheesy in there, but I am the only one who hears it. And I'm starting to really like it.
Yeah, because just even like the words of encouragement, right? The encouragement, the motivation. It's like I said, we're not going to get it. You don't get that as a regular, as an adult. You don't usually get like words of encouragement from that many people, like unless you have really good friends, right? Which we're lucky that we do. But in general, adults don't go around really like, sharing as much as they should on that level because everyone's bogged down with their problems and, you know, they're self-involved and stuff like that. But when you're a child, you could see it like children get a lot of encouragement if they're in healthy environments,
Yeah.
right? If they're not in
Yeah.
healthy environments, they get no encouragement. But if they're in a healthy environment, it's like they just receive that on a day-to-day level to help them build up the strength and the knowledge of what this is, to have that
Oh,
inner voice.
I was watching my boss work the other day, and he is so freaking smart. And while I was watching him work, he was just like wowing everybody, in this meeting. And I was like, God, this guy, he's just so smart. He's so well organized. Like, he was not traumatized as a child at all. Like, he's just so well balanced. And I was like, this is what a human being looks like who is like, was properly brought up without a lot of trauma, and I was very jealous, you know. I was like, I wish I could have had that. But
Yeah,
knowing my life
people that didn't
experience,
have to deal with any childhood trauma like fall into a completely different category, right? I
yeah.
think you better off not even comparing yourself to that. And that's why sometimes I listen to really intense situations, like people that have experienced some of the craziest things that like I can't even fathom having gone through that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's why I have a lot of compassion because I've had that in my immediate environment as well, where it's like, okay, you might not understand, you might still be hurt by people's actions, but you kind of understand due to
Hmm.
situations. And the whole thing is, listening to these people's stories really puts things in context for me. And everyone has the ability to heal and to adapt from like the worst situations. It might take time, but it is possible given the correct tools and seeing the correct, like I was mentioning at the beginning, like, someone like a licensed practitioner who really has many years of experience in dealing with some of the harsher stuff, like can really bring someone back into wholeness so that, they're not stuck in just, these like different parts of self as alters just taking over, right?
And
And
you
then
know, that
having,
guy, it really helps you develop that inner coach, right? Because that's all that's going to change. It's your perspective. It's that inner dialogue that you need to get a grip on because nothing else in the world is going to change until that changes in your mind, right? Like you cannot expect the world to change around you. You have to change it through that cognitive reframing, right? Like we are in charge of our own reality, and it's through these inner voices that we create that reality.
Mhm.
And we allow these different alter egos of ourselves to be in control because we actually don't even know that they're there.
Mhm.
I think it's all
Yes,
us.
exactly. It's the lack of awareness that allows them to take control.
Exactly. But that's what I'm saying now that I know that this is my procrastination language, my harsh judgment on people. When I'm having thoughts like this, I know my inner critic is in charge, right? And I know now when my inner rebel's in charge. When I am also procrastinating, but doing things that I shouldn't be doing, risk taking, right? And enjoying things that I shouldn't be enjoying. And, you know, just basically self-sabotaging all the work that I got into and all the progress that I made. I'll convince myself that I don't feel like working out when I freaking love working out, you know?
Yeah,
And it's
so let's talk about like distinguishing the difference because like I know that you have a really strong internal dialogue. So you're able to, you've been working on this for a long time and you've built up this like really strong dialogue where you have been negotiating with different parts. And so identifying how these different states or alters or, different parts of self come up, right? To as a form of protection or as a form of whatever, how they show up is very different than, for example, like with me, the type of like mind that I have, they really come in as like states. There's
yeah.
not so much, I'm kind of open to this like intuitive insight, in terms of like how my, how I interact with mind is kind of different. So building up the internal dialogue feels like counterintuitive for me, but it's still, I think, a healthy part of building up like a really strong inner psychology,
Well, you
really
can't
strong inner
actually take
relationship.
action if you don't have any thoughts, right? So if you're like just sitting there in the ether, like just in a space of void, then it's good for resting and connecting to God, but like you need to like I feel like we're here to do things in the world. That's why we're all so interesting and we're all like feel this desire to do things, right? We're not
I
meant to be
agree.
here and be boring.
I agree. But in defense of just different, in terms of neurodiversity, like, and how everyone thinks differently, everyone learns differently. Some people learn more visually, some people learn more with reading, reading books. They'll get way more information than listening to a video, right? Or a teacher
Mhm.
talking. So in
Mhm.
the same way that people can learn in different ways, people also think in different ways, right? And
Yes.
so there's a lot of calculating happening on
Yeah.
maybe even like a really broad perspective. Like, there's tons of calculations happening, but then there's this sort of like, I'm in the state of the observer where I'm observing a whole bunch of things going on that isn't in really strong, like a narrative, like a really strong, inner voice. It's kind of like a lot of inner
Yeah.
voices and like, this sort of state. So there's still planning happening, but it's
Yeah.
happening from a kind of deep intuitive place. So bringing this up is to just, kind of speak to the people out there that have that have more of a kind of intuitive way of thinking and that don't have that strong voice or that strong inner dialogue. And then
Mm-hmm.
notice how they can approach this won't be so much addressing that inner voice, like, oh, the inner aggressor's out, and you hear it really clearly. It's going to be how it's going to come in is it's going to be a state of being. Like,
But
so the person might be able to identify it more through how they feel and
yeah.
how it, and it's just kind of like this, a wave of energy, right? That comes in versus like a voice that you're like, oh, I know, I can identify you. I know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's like, yeah, it's going to come up in different ways for different people, but it
Mm-hmm.
could just be that you catch yourself in a state of isolation. You're like, oh, I've been isolating myself for like a month now, Well, that's part of this whole thing is that the isolation started driving the helm, that altar, right, that isolated itself to protect itself,
Mm-hmm.
right, because the inner critic took over and the
Yeah.
inner coach was present, the inner rebel was away,
Mm-hmm.
just took the helm. And then it's like you just realize you've been in a state of isolation or you've been in a state where you've been like in paranoia,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of it being like healthy details where you like the inner critic is like harnessing that energy of like being detail oriented. If it's
Mm-hmm.
in a negative way, it's going to come in through the paranoia and just starting to be really, that will come up here. And then the paranoia is driving the helm. And then
Mm-hmm.
everything gets, kind of painted in that color.
Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing, like the more I talk to people about this, like, depending on your upbringing, like for me, my inner critic gets the party started and then passes the baton over to the inner rebel, and then my inner rebel takes over, and I have my inner coach cannot compete with my inner rebel and my inner critic. It's not a very strong voice in comparison to those two. And the two of those together always overpower my inner coach you know.
Mm-hmm.
But like other people that I've spoken to, they don't have any inner rebel voice.
Well, yeah,
They're way more
yeah.
subdued, but their inner critic is on fire, and their inner coach doesn't exist, right? And then there's like people with more inner, like, so I think we're all going to be trying to balance these depending on our upbringing and how we were raised and just our personalities, and there's no right or wrong to this, but really our goal will be to always revert back to the inner coach and make sure that the inner coach is the one who's in charge, because when the other two sneak in, it doesn't work out well either way, right? We want to like I want to like consult with my inner critic, consult with my inner rebel, and make decisions as my inner coach.
Exactly. Because the inner critic, right? There's judgment there. So it could be that part of ourselves that is, can discern, right,
Yeah,
about things going on in the world. It can discern about things happening within the self that might be off.
that's
So the
right.
inner critic they all have a healthy role to play if they are not lopsided
Exactly.
and totally
They're like
taking over the
supporting roles. They were never meant to be in charge, and they just get so inflated through our own personal internal dialogue, or silence or whatever, however we're processing things. And we don't even realize that we've got one dominant alternate personality that's like really taken over and has been in charge. And this, like, we go to bed at night and we wake up in the morning, and that personality is still in charge. There was no change that took the power back, right? That, like, you have to actually create that to overcome you know, all of these qualities that each one of the inner critic and the inner rebel has, right? And
Mhm.
so,
Yeah. So it is a balancing act.
mhm,
It is a practice of self-awareness, of catching yourself in whatever state you're in and
mhm,
being like, who's driving the helm right now?
yeah,
What are their needs? What are your needs? How can I meet
mhm,
those needs in a healthy way so that you
yeah,
don't keep on taking over?
yeah,
Streamline everything through the inner coach. Uh, but really, I don't know if it has to be streamlined through the inner coach, more as it has to be negotiated with, that soul or that I am that I am.
yeah.
Like it has to be streamed through here. Maybe the inner
But I think
coach.
our inner coach is always in alignment with the I am that I am, right? Like that is the coach wants the best for you. The coach is understanding. The coach is not going, see, it's encouragement, it's motivation, it's goal setting, it's healthy boundaries, right? It's not saying I'm a pushover. It's not saying I
Well,
get
the
a
inner
deal.
coach, if it's taken to an extreme form of protection, right? It could be the what's the word I'm looking for? It could be like the unhealthy ego, like the pompous,
But
the
I feel like that would fall under critic, the inner critic, because you're criticizing others, your ego gets big, you know, again, that I would
yeah.
feel like that would be a criticism of others and yourself, and that's not a true inner coach. Like the coach, everybody's even on the team,
Hmm.
the coach doesn't favor one player. The coach
Or
is even
shouldn't.
Steve.
Yeah.
It
So
should.
a healthy inner coach. Let's just assume that
Yeah,
it's a healthy inner coach.
exactly.
And this is the part that most people don't have anyway, that they're trying to build up. And these are
Hmm.
usually, we could put many, like if you look at John Uller's, descriptions going in the psychology of the victim and stuff like that, it really breaks it down into many different parts, but we found it easier to look at it in this way and just have these three main columns,
Hmm.
um, rather than having everything kind of scattered out all over the place. It's easier to sort of categorize them and be like, what is this voice coming up right now? What am I doing? Like, what's this, you know, uh, whatever, stagnation or impulsive action? Oh, and then be able to categorize it. And then it's really everything comes down to the awareness. So like the more aware, it's almost like once the light gets in, darkness can't exist, right? Once the light has shone on it. And by using this model, I found that once you shine the light, like let's say if I'm in a stagnant mode and I'm just kind of sitting there, right? And it's like pure stagnation, by just having this awareness and being like, okay, what state am I in right now? Oh, it's stagnation. Oh, it's inner critic. And it's like, this is a snowball effect, right? And then
Hmm.
it's like, it can't hide anymore. It's
No,
out in the open.
yeah. Yeah.
And then
And
all
you
these
know what
other
you can
parts.
expect from that personality from yourself. And then that's why it like gives you the opportunity to shift into the inner coach and be like, okay, I don't want to be, you know, procrastinating all day. I can see that I'm behaving this way right now. And like I need to do something. Let's go do something.
Yeah.
Right.
So then it's taking healthy action, informed action,
Yeah.
uh, on how to proceed based on the self-awareness of what's coming up, and some people have like, I don't know, I think we had addiction under inner critic
Hmm.
because it's that part of self. I mean, it could be under inner rebel as well. Um, I think,
Mm.
did we have it
It's
under?
one of those magical things that I think can go in both of those columns. Like I think it can be depending on like like the inner critic can judge you if you're not, if you give in, and then the inner rebel is the part of you that gives in, right? So it's kind of like both share in that one. in my opinion, in addiction. And that's why it's so hard to get over addiction, because it's like the inner those two work together to make that happen.
Okay, yeah. So is it two Ds? I kind of
Yeah.
like addiction. Yeah. So this is where, yeah, I think you're entirely right. Inner critic will lead to isolation, will lead to lack of healthy contact, which
Yeah.
usually leads to addiction. As the
Mhm.
opposite of addiction is connection.
Yeah.
And then, if the inner rebel, so it would be taking
Escapism.
impulsive action to
Escapism.
protect
Right.
escapism. That's right. Okay, escapism. There it is. I was kind of looking for it and trying to figure it out and
Mhm.
in
And
terms
the
of where it was
rebel is
showing up.
like, I'm gonna drink my problems away. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't fucking care. I'm gonna drink
Yeah.
my problems away and just kind of get this like fuck it
Fuck it,
attitude.
I don't care. I'm just gonna be over here having my own little party of one here, drinking my face.
And, for those listening, like it doesn't have to be, it comes in many forms. So, it could be shopping, right? Just because I don't drink or you don't drink doesn't mean that there's not something that falls into, right? It could be a sex addiction. It
Mm-hmm.
could be shopping. It could be
Mm-hmm.
eating. It could be, just social
Nosiness.
media. What's that?
Nosiness, getting in other people's business.
Yeah, exactly. An addiction to drama,
Yeah.
right? There's all these forms of addiction that are basically buried underneath, some inner child somewhere that
Mm.
hasn't had its needs met.
Mm. And I was also
So,
just thinking about how the inner rebel is like, don't look at me. It's like it just was like, let me have my fun. Like, don't judge me. It has this air of like, leave me the frick alone.
yeah. Yeah, um oh, what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of like self-sabotaging, but it's going to go to the extreme,
Mhm. Like
right?
masochism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I
And that's the
find that
opposite of connection, right? Like that's we get like screw the world.
yeah, like a
Nobody loves
rebellious
me.
kind of like, yeah,
I'm
or
just
I'm
gonna
better
drink
than
myself to
everyone,
it.
everyone's an idiot,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it could come up like that. Because like the difference between the inner protection, like the inner rebel, the protection will be more this kind of forceful uh type of protection where the person pushes everyone away or protects itself by being aggressive or by, really taking things to an extreme. It's like
Hmm.
a completely different form of protection than the inner critic. The inner critic will be like more like poor me,
Okay.
um, like
Don't
no
let them
one,
get close to you.
the victim, like I'm the victim, whereas the inner rebel protection is like I'm the aggressor and I'm gonna keep,
Yeah.
like I'll keep on protecting myself this way if I have to. And, you know, like that kind of voice, like um it's kind of funny because well, I know with different different practices, like within like if you go see a psychoanalyst or whatever, they're going to get you to name these different parts, right? To actually give them a name
Mm-hmm.
to really get to know them so that you start understanding their personality by naming them.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been aware of this. I'm sure you have as well, because we've, been looking at this stuff for years, but
Mm-hmm.
really just the fun that you can have in that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that it's not so let's just say it doesn't feel so boring, right? To do the work when you start giving the parts names. You can kind of take it too far too. Like you don't want it to like continue to just, oh, I'm happy having all these parts, these different personalities. You
I
don't
have
want
to
it to
take
build up in that way.
responsibility for their behavior. They can behave however they want. I have no control over that. That's not true. That is still part of you. Just because you give them names doesn't mean it's not still you, right? Like that's really what we're trying to uh get to the bottom of is that, these other two, the critic and the inner rebel, they're just like, acting like they're not me, but they are me. And I want to be the one who
Yeah.
is governing them. And they are part of me. And I want them to be part of me. I don't want them to go anywhere, but I also want them to evolve. I think they were all created during a time when I wasn't healed, and now I've done the work. I feel great. I'm like super, I love my job. I'm one of those few people who has a job that actually I can say I love it, like I really am at a good place in my life, and I still have this old dialogue that is happening, and I need to clean it up. And the only way I can do that is from getting a grip of that voice in my head. And I learned that from Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now. It's a great book, and it really explains how that if you do have that voice in your head, it's not your friend and it's trying to hurt you, and that's what this is,
Oh
taking
my
it down a
gosh,
little
you're
bit
making me
deeper.
realize Stockholm syndrome with the self.
Yeah.
Like when people actually start believing that these different parts of self are working on the same team, right? That's the
Yeah.
self-sabotage. It's like Stockholm syndrome with the self.
Yeah.
It's
Right. And
that's pretty
that's
deep.
it. And we really, it is all about mastering the mind. And this is what it's about. Like, this is what mastering the mind means, is getting control over these different versions of ourselves and learning how to identify them and guiding them out so that they're not just running without a captain, right? Like, they need a captain to guide them through. They can't nobody's gonna let their inner critic just talk, right? Out loud. You're gonna have to filter that inner critic because what you're thinking is not polite, right? So you can't just go out into the world and start spewing out of your mouth your procrastination language, your stagnation, I'm lazy. It's like you don't tell people that stuff. It stays hidden inside of you, right? It's not the voice
Mhm.
you want to present to the world. And neither is the rebel. I want to be an alcoholic and drink all the time and have fun. And that's not the other voice. Like, I want my inner coach, the one that I'm proud of, the true me, to be like I'm achieving in life and I help people and I'm a good person who is contributing to the overall well-being of the planet through just good old-fashioned soul searching and becoming a better person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because that's really the best way to affect the world is by just falling in love with yourself again. And then you'll shine that out to the world. Because, I used to have the worst internal dialogue. I used to say things like, get the fuck out of my face or I'm going to chop your head off and kick your head down the street. Like, that's the kind of stuff I was saying in my mind when I would be talking to people. And
Because
I,
which part of self was it? It was the aggressor that would take over the helm to protect you.
exactly, but that wasn't me. Right?
No,
That was that
it was a
balance
part that it was a part that
that
developed to protect you.
charge. Exactly. And that part of me was like running the show all the time. And I couldn't get it to shut up for the life of me, because I didn't realize I could tell it to shut up. And then I read the Power of Now, and through that book, I realized that you can get control over those voices in your head. You have to start
Mhm.
separating them from you and acknowledging when they're talking, right? And I started this all with learning how to talk to my ego, because my ego, was all these voices. It was basically my inner critic, but my inner critic was just so loud. It was judging everything. It was judging me, everybody I saw, always commenting, rehashing everything, all interactions that I had during the day, you know and replaying scenarios over and over. I couldn't change the outcome of those scenarios, but I would just keep replaying them in my mind. Oh, I really said something good there. Or, oh no, he said something there, and that bothered me. And It's like, just shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
I didn't realize I could do that. And then once I started getting control over that voice, then I started to see that, like, you know, there's a much softer, better voice inside of me that isn't anything like that nasty voice that was talking.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And those aren't really, it's conditioning, right? It's childhood conditioning. It's often it's what we received growing up, right? We just kind of mimic our environment. And so whatever you
Well,
have in
I
your
don't think I'm
environment, if
alone in that one. I think a lot of people will, grow up in places where, you know, they yelled at kids, they told them, look what the fuck you did, you stupid idiot.
yeah,
And when you're
exactly,
a
right?
kid
So
and you
that
hear
becomes
that,
part of the inner
it's really
dialogue
kind of like,
of yeah, if you hear that voice
exactly.
enough, right? If you hear someone telling you that enough, then that is the part of self that's going to be built up the most, right? So that's why it's so important within those years of development that they receive, the language of love, they receive the language of self-care, they receive the language of connection, of motivation, and all these things in order to
That's exactly what built up my boss, and I really saw it. I was like, God, this is what, he's so emotionally stable and he's kind, he's understanding. I've never felt pressure from him at work, and we work in such a stressful environment, and he's just so good at handling everything. And I'm always just so envious of his ability just to be so like calm and he's like thinks things through, and I really want to be more like that.
But yeah, I mean, that can kind of plague people, right? Who, especially people who have really experienced a lot of trauma,
Yeah.
um, in their childhood, they go through like until you realize, well, this is quite normal that I would feel this way, right?
Mm.
Someone who has experienced something really traumatic can't expect themselves to have those things built up, and they can't be angry at themselves for not having those parts, within self. Like
But that's
it's
what
just
happened to me. I had a very
so
traumatized childhood, and I had that evil internal dialogue, and I had to go and realize that voice was like making me suicidal. It was making me depressed. It was making me all these things. And I had to face that about myself and really kind of like start analyzing what was going on in my own brain, because it was all in my own head. It wasn't outside of me.
yeah, exactly. It's all like, what is it? Grandmaster Wolf was saying 90% of problems can be corrected by our own thoughts, right? And we
Yeah.
still have to address it. It's a collective thing. Everybody is having thoughts. And so once we can start discerning properly and seeing clearly because we've cleared up all these, kind of shadow aspects and unhealed parts of self, then we can really start making headway in terms of like seeing things for truly what they are in the world, right? And being able to distinguish when something is harmful. Because a lot of people that have suffered from, things in childhood, what ends up happening is that they actually have like the Stockholm syndrome is really strong, so
Yeah.
they just keep on putting themselves in these situations where they become loyal to the wrong things, the wrong people, the wrong, like things that harm the self, right?
But
Just
again, I
because
think that all comes back to
was the
that internal
pattern.
dialogue creating that your reality, right? Because you become a magnet to those things, but that's because your brain is like, look, there's a guy, he's a badass. He suits your badass, you know,
Hmm.
self-perception. And so that's what you think you're worthy of. And so that's what you
Hmm.
attract.
Exactly. Exactly. So, there are good parts. Like once, people get a hold of just like a better understanding of all the different parts of self and really identifying what they are, what their needs are, what they're trying to, accomplish, then it's easier to negotiate with them. And then, try to set out a plan, like have the goals, orient yourself to fulfilling those needs in a healthy way.
Mhm.
And that's already like half the battle. right? And then after that, it gets easier and easier each time these parts come up to
Mhm.
identify them instead of identifying with them, right? Instead of becoming them,
Yeah.
right? If, let's say, for example, jealousy or envy or any of these things, right? Instead of identifying with them, it's like there's really this separation, this observer that is now
Mhm.
looking and seeing, like, oh, okay, this is coming up. I need to give myself some self-care.
Mhm.
I need to speak more gently with myself. I need to challenge
Tell myself
myself.
I look good today because I like just my ego needs a little boost up. And I need to like, instead of judging other people, I'm gonna fulfill myself in another way, my ego in a different way. I'm gonna look at myself in the mirror and be like, "You're looking good today, cutie. Look at that,"
Mhm,
you know? And instead of being focused on what other people are doing, I'm gonna try to like redirect that back at myself in a more positive way so that I can start creating these new regular thought patterns that are supportive, because like in the past, my go to were all the negatives, and now when a negative voice speaks inside my head, I'm like, who the hell said that? Where
mhm,
did that come from? I can hear it because it's distinct. I don't call myself a dumbass anymore. And if I try to even say the word, like I'll stop myself halfway and be like, we don't talk to ourselves that way anymore. And it's like
mhm,
this, like, it's you have to, it's going to take some effort. You're going to
mhm,
have to, like, observe yourself and be like, okay, I heard that. And you're not going to be perfect. Nobody
mhm,
is. And it's impossible to want to be that way. We're all more interesting not being perfect. So don't try to be perfect, but try to, like, be the happiest version of yourself that you can be. That's really the goal, right?
mhm,
Is that you can sit here content and be like, I'm happy. That's okay. I love me. I feel good inside my head. There's like peace there now. I don't have to be, thrown around the room inside my own mind every day. I can just sit in there and be like, it's good, and
mhm.
uh, I've come a long way. My brain was so chaotic and the nasty stuff that I used to say to myself all the time. It was horrible. I was very angry and I was just radiating that anger all the time. And nothing has changed except my own perception. I didn't get
Mhm,
millions of dollars. I didn't fall in love. I didn't, none of that
mhm.
changed me, but the way that I think changed me.
But
That's
also,
right.
yeah,
There.
the way that you think allowed you to, also work towards certain goals that you had, right? And I think it's all about channeling that energy into uh into goals, personal goals, right? And constantly hacking at that, like, okay, I want to have a better job, I want to have this, I want to have that, I want to own my home, I want to, get in shape, all these things are personal goals that I want to write a book, I want to own a company, I want to travel the world, like whatever it happens to be, that's where once all that gets cleared up, then it is possible to start using all these parts of self, which can all have their positive and negative charge to them, to really saying, okay, in this situation, I really need to bring out the risk taker, like we discussed that, right? Because if you're someone who can't ever take risks, well, it's really difficult to make certain business maneuvers, for example, right? Or invest money in yourself on a bigger scale, to invest in a business or all these different things. So,
Even in a more detrimental situation, like let's say you're in a situation where you have to jump or you're going to die, the risk taker is going to be the one that jumps, right? Like
mhm,
it is part of your survival, that risk taker. I think in the world, like some of the biggest things that we achieve are things that are considered risks, right? And they become our
yeah,
biggest trophies in the end.
Yeah, 100%. You need to be able healthy risk taking, right?
Yeah.
Healthy risk taking definitely allows things to move. And, anyone who's opened up a business knows you have to take risk, whether it be with credit or, all sorts of things. And even taking a risk on yourself and saying, you know what, like my inner critic is saying that I can't get this degree or I can't, go back to school at whatever age, or that I can't, I won't find a partner that is suitable for me,
Hmm.
and then actually taking the risk. It falls in that category of taking a risk and being like, I'm going to take a risk and I'm just going to go for it anyway. I'm going to go on that date. I'm going to go do, you know, it
Apply for that
all,
job.
yeah, exactly. So like these parts of self are all needed, I think. Like you need to have the aggressor, because if you need to protect yourself, you need to be able to
Yeah.
get up there and fight,
Yep.
right? And
Yeah.
so all these parts of self do have impulsive action too, like maybe, in terms of if there's an emergency situation and you have to act and think quickly, there's, something happens, you have to have that impulsive action that's going to be like, okay, go, go, go,
Hmm.
right? Maybe the self-saboteur, like that one, I can't really see any positives for it, right? Escapism, paranoia. Paranoia can sometimes be good, like if you really need to have heightened state of awareness because you're in a situation where you need to be hyper aware and hyper vigilant of what's going on. Maybe that paranoia can come into play in a healthy way. And then jealousy and envy can sometimes, lead people to challenge themselves more, right? And to get their goals going because they're like, I would like that. If you can transmute that energy and you're like, oh, I feel jealous. Why? Because I really want that for myself. I
Hmm.
mean, that could be fuel. If it doesn't come and take over the helm,
Hmm.
right? And start driving the boat, and then you're identifying as that, it's actually really positive. So most of these things are super positive.
Hmm.
Um,
And I like the
and
fact that I am like, yes, I was that person, so I have that side of me. And I like that I have the potential to be evil, but I choose to be good now. And
mhm,
like that I've tamed that side of me that is potentially, dangerous. And
yeah.
I don't like when I was in my emotional state and I had that negative internal dialogue, like I was waiting for people to mess with me so that I could unload all of my energy onto them, and
Hmm.
now I like I have control over that side of myself and I don't need to unload on anybody anymore. And I like
Hmm.
knowing that, like, even though I have the potential to unload and be this, like, super intense, crazy person, I just have evolved past that. I don't need it, you know?
Hmm. Yeah,
But it's
I
still
do.
part of me. And if I needed to tap into it for some sort of self-preservation, I would be able to tap into that side
That's
of
it.
myself, right?
It's for self-preservation, exactly. And, I mentioned that to a friend recently where, a lot of like if you're someone who is bullied in school or you're beat up or you learn really valuable lessons. You learn how to protect yourself,
Hmm.
you learn how to protect others, and you learn how to fight, and you learn you learn that you can protect yourself if you have to.
Hmm.
So every situation, including traumas, once, if they're really severe, I mean, it's hard to have that perspective when you're going through the healing process,
Yeah.
but there's always a diamond in the rough, right? Of every, like with every sort of really intense pressure, um, there is a diamond that is created within that circumstance.
Yeah, it's
And so
actually one of the
finding
biggest
that
gifts
and
you can give
harnessing it.
yourself. That's what, like one of the biggest gifts you can give yourself is overcoming these things in your life and turning
Hmm.
them into the best thing that ever happened to you instead of being the thing that tore you down and destroyed your whole life. You actually took
Hmm.
that and made it the best thing that ever happened to you because through that you became the person that you are today.
Exactly. Taking the fuel, all the fuel that your enemies shoot at you and send at you and being like, send it on, bitch.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Well,
uh
it only makes you
yeah.
stronger, right? Like, and then like once you get good at this stuff, you like start really like life can't throw anything at you that you can't handle after a while because you just, you got this, right? You just you have yourself. You, like
Hmm.
I love my connection to God because that's like where I get a lot of my own strength. And
Hmm.
with me and God together, man, there's nothing we can't do. Like I never feel alone. And I know that like God's always rooting for me to get this going, but he's also not judging me for not having it going,
The higher
you
power.
know?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, and I like having that. I don't have to be
Hmm.
perfect. I just have to keep trying.
Yeah.
Some days I try more than others because that's just how I feel, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
don't think
Yeah.
we're like, there's no way you can try hard every day because we just don't feel like it every day. And it's okay.
For sure. And there's also this thing that's come up about, it just in society in general, you have a lot of motivational speakers, right,
Mm,
that are talking to people and telling them, giving these workshops on how to become a leader, which
mm,
I just think is hilarious, right? Because we're not all meant to, we are going to be what we're going to be based on our skill set, right? And everybody's a leader in their own way, whatever, whether that's being a caregiver, right? All the way
mm,
to owning a business but I just think it's so ironic that there's all these leadership workshops.
mm.
I might be deviating a bit from the topic, but it's just come
No,
up,
I think they're great. I think we need to like take whatever nuggets, like go out into the world and learn from everybody a little bit and learn from, take what you learn from that person and bring it and make your own version of that, test it out in your life, see what works for you. And like, because we're here to inspire each other, like the whole
I
independent thought
agree.
is great, but we also are also here to like, show off for each other a little bit, right? Like that's why we like watching shows and seeing. I love
I
watching
agree. I
people.
agree. But where I think people go wrong is that they tend to believe that if you are not, if you're a leader, you're going to be in a position of leadership. Like, don't make that mistake. If you're a leader, you're going to be already in a position of leadership. And and then instead of people who aren't truly leaders because their skill sets lie somewhere else, end up going and trying to become a leader, right? Because they become infatuated with this person, this motivational speaker. And then they are taking, tons and spending tons of money and doing all these different courses to become a leader. But really, sometimes their value may be because everyone has their purpose. Like you can't have, if there's too many, cooks in the kitchen, you can't just have only leaders, right? Nothing would get done. So there's a lot of people that are really, really good at supportive roles. Like I'm really good at a supportive role, but give me a good leader. Don't give me like, a leader that I can't completely and, trust, let's just say, right? But if it's someone who I completely trust, and from my position of inner leadership and inner authority, I can judge them as like, this person has good discernment, I will give them as a team, one of the team members, but allowing them to lead my
Mm,
full, force, which comes with a lot of like Midas touch. It comes with a lot, like I know what I contribute, and I can really contribute a lot, but not in
mhm,
a position of leadership because I don't like, there's certain things within my character, my personality that I don't want to have to be the one taking that risk and every day waking up and saying, oh, I got $10,000 of credit. This company better get going, or, all these different things that leaders have to do. They have to make decisions that, could possibly impact their life in a really negative way. If you go bankrupt, right? It's not all about money, but it's also about different actions that you have to take in the world because you're responsible for all these other people that are looking up to you as a leader. So I guess all I really wanted to say was for people who are out there, especially these, a lot of like men's groups and stuff like that, I kind of feel like, there's just not as many women's group that are, trying to teach someone how to become a leader. You see it more with the men's groups. And I just feel like saying, to some of these people, like, it's okay to not be a leader, right? Because if you're a leader, can't be a leader if he doesn't have a really strong team around him. You know what I mean? If the leader loses his team completely, he's no longer a leader, he's just nobody, right? Or she. So everybody plays their role. So for people that kind of feel like they're never going to make it if they don't get into a leadership role, I say bullocks. I said that's not true at all. Like, it's about finding your unique skill, your unique path, and then really doing that well.
Mm, mm.
It's like,
But we're not
you
going
know,
to do that unless we get control over these voices in our head. That's
yeah, exactly.
we're
Exactly.
that's all great. But until we get this figured out, we're probably not going to be achieving much of that stuff, right? Because we're going to fall into these traps of allowing the inner critic to bring us to keep us stagnant, or the inner rebel, focusing us on having fun versus, on achieving our goals. So I think, like,
Exactly.
not everybody should be a leader out in the world, but we should be our own internal leader. I
100%.
think that's,
100%.
we need to like have
Yeah.
a little bit of that leadership. Because I'm like you, I don't want to be the leader of a big company. I like being underneath. I like being high up. Don't get me wrong. I like my position. I'm high,
You
but
like
I'm
leading
not
teams and yeah.
like I'm like a platoon leader. I'm not the general, right? It's like I like being a sergeant. I'm in charge of people, but I don't make all the big decisions, and I don't have like that's not really in the stars for me. But again, like you, I know that. I don't really want to be the leader, worrying about all the things that running a business does. I like to just focus on my tasks and do my tasks. So,
Mm,
but my internal self needs to be that leader,
mm-hmm.
right? And so, I think it's like it's good for us to strengthen our inner coach and get that voice nice and strong and listen for the different types of words we're using so that we can recognize, what part of our alter egos are running the boat at any time, and or driving the boat, like and see if we can get the coach back. Always getting the coach back in charge. And then soon the coach will be in charge all the time. And the inner rebel and the inner critic will be happy because the inner coach will guide the inner rebel to new, more fun experiences. And the inner critic will be happy because the inner coach will help her achieve goals and,
Yeah,
do
100%.
things.
And I think what's
Yeah.
important to mention is that both Kelly and I have accomplished quite a bit in our lifetime. And the whole purpose is to keep on digging, right? And it's to keep on moving forward and keeping on challenging yourself and not giving up just because, a lot of people become adults and they just give up all this inner work, right? But we've always kind of been on this tip of like, let's go further and let's challenge ourselves a bit more. And one of the things that has come up through this is that there is a difference between, like, if you're willing to succeed at all costs, right? That's when you can easily become a sociopath,
Yeah.
right? And then things can develop really quickly into psychopath, right? If you start losing touch with your core, with your soul, and with that human aspect of self in order to obtain what it is you want in the world. And then
But
it
you see,
becomes
that
all
would be
about,
just
wait, just
reflective
one
of that
second.
inner.
It becomes all about this like power, right? Trying to obtain power. So all I wanted to say quickly is that you want to make sure that these parts of self can take over to the point where you may be successful, right? Because a lot of these people that are true, perpetrators in the world, right? The true corruption and the really dark stuff, they're, they come off as having a lot of inner authority,
Mm.
right? That's, so just wanted to mention that if some of these parts of self take over, right? It's like they have alters too that just kind of take over. And then all these other parts atrophy, right?
Mm.
Uh, and you don't want to obtain success at those costs because it happens incrementally and it's like the frog in boiling water.
Mm.
People chasing after, that power and that ultimate, like, symbol of power or money or, whatever it is for them over time it happens slowly. It doesn't happen all at once. It's like this slow kind of degradation of the soul. So similarly to a child that gets traumatized, over time, it's like these parts are complete alters that can just take over and they don't even realize they no longer have any self-awareness that their alter has taken over
Yeah,
the helm for
yeah.
that period. They can have blackouts and, do all sorts of crazy things during that time, right?
Yeah, I would
Uh,
think that a sociopath would have not have the inner coach. It would just have the inner rebel and the inner critic, and the inner coach would be like, not a voice because it would either be jealousy and all these other things that help perpetuate that kind of mindset, and
mhm,
then the inner rebel is like self pleasure, sex deviant, like only
mhm.
thinking about their own pleasure. And then the coach would be nowhere to be seen.
Yeah. So if the inner critic has sexual denial, I don't know if that's like a good, just kind of trying to find the correct wording for that. And the inner rebel has sexual deviance. What
Mm.
would the inner coach have?
Love.
It would be healthy
It
intimacy.
wouldn't be sexual, it'd be just love. Right.
Yeah, but I guess what is the healthy form of sexuality? It would be healthy intimacy, like being able to be intimate, like vulnerable intimacy
Yeah, well,
with your
that's it.
partner.
I feel like that's why I call it love, because when I have sex with somebody that I don't really care about, I call it sex, right? But when I have a partner that I care about, I call it making love.
Hmm. I'll put love in there. Yeah, because love is an action, right? It's like you need to take action for love to happen, right? It's this constant like nurturing, not only thinking of the self, but thinking of the other's needs. And you can't think of anybody else's needs if you have these other impulsive parts, right? All these other parts driving the helm. You're not going to be thinking of your partner's needs.
No.
So even coming into a healthy relationship, is all about developing this like inner coach and understanding the parts of self.
Yeah.
Because in order for your partner to understand you, you have to be able to, know yourself and explain yourself to your partner, right? We can all have hiccups and be like, okay, I'm dealing with, we all have different parts that we're dealing with. But as long as
Hmm.
we're aware of them, then we can basically explain ourselves, right? And say, I'm working on this, and then the partner can get to know you. And it's like there's a vulnerability and an intimacy that builds up based on
Hmm.
that trust, right? Um, so
Hmm.
yeah.
And understanding.
Hmm. I am so, so happy that we did this. I'm really excited to get this out. And, I really do believe it's all about contributing where we can to everything, happening on a global scale. It's like there's so much healing happening and there's so much all the breakdown of corruption. And like I mentioned earlier, all of these people coming forth and doing the healing work, right, is literally breaking down the structures of society because they're calling out people in positions of authority, right? People are calling out things happening in society through their healing. It's just kind of a natural occurrence. And then the scales are being tipped. And all of a sudden, it's not, the sociopaths in control. It's actually like, real, healthy, genuine humans organic humans, genuine human beings kind of coming in and tipping that scale so that, it's not lopsided and things just keep on going in the wrong direction. So all of this, I think, I watch tons of videos like everybody else and, whatever I get called to, and there's always something in it when we share, for someone else to continue to pick up and continue doing that work. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely today. Thank you.
I really appreciate you, my friend. I'm going to stop the video now and we can just continue chatting.